and will then open it up to the floor for questions and comments. I ask that you keep your comments or questions brief so more people have a chance to participate. We have a public comment period at the end of today's program if you have further comment beyond that. I'd like to read a brief bio. Senator Gavarone grew up in Centerville, Ohio, and graduated from Archbishop Alder High School in Dayton. A resident of Wood County for over 35 years, Senator Gavarone was a member of Bowling Green City Council before serving in the Ohio legislature. Senator Gavarone is a graduate of Bowling Green State University and the University of Toledo Law School, and she lives in Wood County with her husband and 3 children. Senator Gavarone, I can't thank you enough for being here with us today, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. I need to start off by saying I've got to leave at 1:20. It's a hard stop. I've got to get to committee. But anyone who has questions that we're not able to answer in the 7 minutes I have, please email my office at gavarone@ohiosenate.gov. Gavarone, Gavarone @ohiosenate.gov if you have questions. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about Senate Concurrent Resolution 2, and it's a water quality bond issue. So my district is all of Wood County, all of Ottawa County, all of Erie County, part of Lucas, and most of Fulton counties. And I have the largest stretch of Lake Erie shoreline, larger than any other member of the General Assembly, with the Lake Erie Islands and Ottawa and Erie County. But I also have rich agricultural community as well. And we know how important water quality is, not just to Northern Ohio, but to the state as a whole in terms of drinking water, recreation, tourism. And it's really important that we're doing what we can to protect and preserve Lake Erie for generations to come. So the bond issue is really a way to make sure we've got funding available to make real lasting changes. We're making great strides in terms of research and best management practices for the agricultural community to work with ODNR and the natural water filtration, the wetlands that are being created here, and also working with the APA in like I guess lead pipe fixes, but also failing septic systems and sewer overflows, those issues as well. So I was very excited when Governor DeWine came up with the H2 Ohio program in the last budget, and really excited about the prospects and the way it broke it up into different areas. And I think it's really important that we're doing what we can to continue that funding. So a bond issue, which this resolution would create, is a fund that could not be diverted in times of economic downturn. So last General Assembly, we created the H2 Ohio program, and then COVID hit, and there were cuts. And this General Assembly, we're back in, and the executive's budget gave solid funding, and it got cut in the House. So we're working to restore that here in the Senate, but it just kind of illustrates the benefits of having a bond issue, funds that could not be diverted. So this would create $1 billion over the span of 10 years, $100 million a year for 10 years. For water quality improvement projects in Ohio, not just for Lake Erie, but throughout Ohio. So this would, when the language is finalized and gets through the Senate, has to get through the House, then it would go to the voters, and the voters could decide if this is a good investment for Ohio. So that's kind of what's behind it. I see this as a long-term funding solution for H2 Ohio, to make sure that we've got funds available to continue moving in the right direction. We've gotten a lot of good things going here, and we want to make sure that we can continue this, because protecting and preserving our lake is so important for so many different reasons. And it's important that we're looking to the future, and we have a lasting funding stream that could that we can count on and we can plan for in the future. So I apologize. I've got about 3 minutes for questions before I have to leave. But if anyone has any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer what I can right now.
Kari, why don't you go ahead and ask the questions from our leadership?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Senator Gavarone, for your leadership on this bond initiative. As you're probably aware, TMACOG's Agenda for Lake Erie does recommend and call for a long-term funding mechanism to continue programs that H2 Ohio offers. So one thing that our members have really been pushing on is the issue of accountability and measurable progress in say H2 Ohio or any future funding sources. So is there any sort of oversight board or any other sort of accountability mechanisms as of right now worked into your resolution?
You know, that's a really good point. I think that's crucially important that we have a website, a trend where people can pull up and see what's going on, that it's open to everyone. We can see measurable differences. I know that I had just talked to Dorothy Polanda about a website, and I've had conversations with others. So I also participate in the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus, and I was just pointed to the Great Lakes Commission, working on water quality with other neighboring states as well as Canada, states that border the lake. And there's a website called Blue Accounting that is, I don't know if it's completely updated yet, but it was a work in progress to provide measurable statistics. But I think Ohio needs to have that as well, that we need to make sure we can see what's happening, what's working, what's not, so we are making the most prudent investment with the we've got. We want to make sure that we're doing things that are really going to have lasting input, we can impact, and we can see the progress as we go along, as we make those amendments, or as we make those as every year when we're making those investments.
And I know that TMACOG members and Water Quality Council members would probably like the opportunity to just be involved as this bill moves through the process. So can you, with the few seconds here, can you tell us a little bit?
I tell you what, email me any questions you may have. I actually have to run now to committee. Okay. But thank you so much for the opportunity to talk, and I look forward to continuing the conversation, or call my office and we can have a conversation at another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Gavarone.
Thank you.
All right, well, I apologize there wasn't more time for open questions, but as I said, if you have something to share, we can certainly do it today at our public comment moment at the end of this program. Moving on, we have our next speaker, Sandy Benn, Lake Erie Waterkeeper. I think we all know Sandy, but I'll do a brief bio. Sandy is the executive director for the Lake Erie Waterkeeper, a role she has held since 2004. Sandy has worked with fishermen, boaters, waterfront property owners, and businesses to advocate for improving Lake Erie water quality issues, including nutrients, algae, invasive species, water levels, climate change, and many other regional issues. She was an elected member of the Oregon City Council for 5 terms and was elected to Oregon Clerk Auditor. Sandy sits on several boards, including the Great Lakes Collaboration and Healing Our Waters, and she has been appointed to the International Joint Commission Great Lakes Water Quality Advisory Board. Sandy is an at-large voting member of TMACOG's Water Quality Council. So Sandy, with that, I'll turn the floor over to you. And at the end of your presentation, we'll have some questions, and then we will ask for a motion. It's
Thanks,
all
John.
yours, Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks, TMACOG, for this great opportunity. Just as some background, Lake Erie Waterkeeper is a member of the International Waterkeeper Alliance, which has over 300 waterkeepers worldwide. Each of us have our own watershed. There's 9 keepers in the Great Lakes. And the Lake Erie Waterkeeper's responsibility waters are pretty much the entire Lake Erie watershed. Next. So this conversation, Kari, can you, yeah, thank you. So this conversation is about the Lake Erie Executive Order. And I want to start off by quoting Jeff Reuter, who I think a lot of us respect and have worked with over the years on Lake Erie. He had an editorial in the Blade a week ago, and he was discussing efforts for research and what has happened in Lake Erie. So he says by 2015, after it kind of started in 2002, we developed targets that called for a 40% reduction, Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement Annex 4, in the load that comes into Lake Erie, using 2008 as the base. And he concludes his editorial by saying, while I applaud all these targets, the signers set no penalties for not achieving them. And to date, we have seen no significant progress. Next. So I have been working on this for probably around 20 years. And in looking to who has had success with reducing algae and phosphorus and nitrogen, Chesapeake Bay stands out. And so if we look to Chesapeake Bay for what they did and how they did it, from 1976 till 2009, they were seeing, just as Dr. Reuter said, no progress. It was 33 years of efforts and agreements and studies and research, much of what we're going through now here in Lake Erie. In 2009, President Obama signed an executive order for Chesapeake Bay, and by 2017, they saw a 60% reduction in the amount of phosphorus going into the watershed, and the oysters and the crab came back. To date, Virginia and Maryland have achieved all of their 40% reduction, which is also due by 2025. I don't know why the 40%, but almost all watersheds in the U.S. that have algae issues, it's always 40%. But anyway, the other states that haven't achieved it yet are Delaware, Pennsylvania, District of Columbia, and West Virginia. The states there are actually ready to take Pennsylvania to court for not achieving their 40% reduction. So as we look to that background for Lake Erie and what could happen here, we've had 15 years pretty much of no progress, which, I mean, I started here in 2005. I actually go back to 1995, so I could say it's 25 years when we first saw the algae, and we haven't seen anything yet. We too have the agreements and all the studies and all the wish lists and dollars going in to try and help have something happen. But again, we're not seeing progress. So what can we do differently that can really help the cause? Next. And not only that, but we also should know that, you know, who is really being most impacted by this on an ongoing basis. In a good year or a bad year, all the water plants are having to test and treat and watch very carefully, and it's costly for them. We did an economic study, Lucas County, Oregon, and Toledo, finished in 2019, that showed a $3 million annual cost to the water plants for testing and treating for the algae. There's over $85 million in capital improvements that have been done. Also, as we know, wastewater plants have put in huge retention basins, billions of dollars to help water quality. And right now, Ohio EPA is seeking comments on drinking water harmful algae requirements to add more requirements to the water plants. These are all cost and personnel driven, and they're stressful to especially small water plants, but all have to pay and all have to meet these. The state has no problem in telling local governments what we need to do and what we have to do and taking us to court if we don't do it. Next slide, please. So at the same time, local governments are stepping up at their water and wastewater plants. Sadly, in the last couple months, Ohio is adding even more confined animal feeding operations to the Lake Erie Maumee watershed. They're adding about 40,000 chickens, 22,800 hogs, and 8,424 dairy cows, all that will use liquefied manure and be applied in the Lake Erie and Maumee watersheds. One of these facilities is in Wood County, where they're going to add about 2,040 more dairy cows. That's about 100,000 people's not, well, the total for the total is about 50,000, 40,000 for that one. I'm sorry, 2,000. It's 20 cows about. There's a lot of different statistics you can use. But the point being, they'll have 5,000 cows total at this facility. That's about the land application for manure of 100,000 people. And at the same time, Wood County and Ottawa County are being required to have people, less than 1,000 people, fix their sewage, their septic systems, which is the right thing to do. Please don't hear me wrong. But in doing so, there's 1,000 people being required to pay for their own. At the same time, Ohio is adding another 2,000 dairy cows, or about 40,000 more people's waste to the ground. It just doesn't make sense. And recent studies by the University of Wisconsin show that CAFO expansions actually significantly increase phosphorus coming into the watersheds and going downstream, increase both phosphorus and ammonia in the watersheds. They did this over a 23-year period of studies on increased CAFOs in Wisconsin. And they also say that each CAFO on average costs the waters for boating, swimming, treatment, everything about $203,000. Next. So what is the Lake Erie Executive Order? It's an effort to try and look at what Chesapeake did to turn the corner and make sure we get results. We've been talking about results and accountability for a long time, and we're not seeing anything. So there's a 15-year, in my mind, a 25-year lack of progress on the issue. We had a collaborative agreement in 2015 between Ohio, Michigan, and Ontario that by 2020 was supposed to reduce the phosphorus by 50%. That failed. We've had impairment designations and lots of other things. This Lake Erie Executive Order would have the federal government and its agencies manage and make sure that we actually get the reductions in phosphorus and meet the 40% goal of reduction in 2025. Whoops, sorry about that. So also, just so you know, in Ohio's TMDLs, there is no acknowledgement of the CAFOs and the manure increases, and that really needs to be addressed as well. If we're going to do this, we have to be transparent about what's coming into the system, what's being reduced in the system. And let me just say that the fertilizer, the farmers using commercial fertilizer have really stepped up and done a great job in reducing their inputs by about 40% in the watershed, yet we're seeing no results. So somebody else is adding something. Something's coming into the system that we really need to look at. So this is a request. The executive order is to President Biden for a federal management and accountability to get the 40% reduction in algae in Lake Erie by 2025 with the federal agencies and all the different groups, the states, the researchers, the local governments, the stakeholders. Come to the table and have an annual meeting on accountability and reduction. And we're using the Chesapeake Bay model as the backdrop for this, and it's been a successful model in that they have actually gotten and achieved the reductions, or getting there to their 40% reduction. And how are we doing this? We're doing it through local government resolutions, requesting that Lake Erie, the executive order, requesting the executive order from President Biden. And once this is done, the cities or communities that have passed it are Lucas County, Toledo, Oregon, Sandusky, Lakewood, Luna Pier, and it's being considered in a number of other communities. We're trying to accomplish this by the end of May. And after that, all the communities that have passed the resolution, or anyone who's passed the resolutions, will convene. We'll have a webinar, and we'll go through the executive order to make sure that what we're submitting to the Biden administration is agreeable to all the parties. And then we'll also figure out what the process is in terms of how we want to make the ask of the president. And I just want to conclude with reminding you on the last slide of that there's no significant progress that we've seen. We need to do something different, and this executive order is an opportunity to do something different and to do what Chesapeake has done that really did turn the corner there. I don't know what harm there can be in this because we're kind of not there. And, you know, as we all know, it rained really hard yesterday, and I'm really worried about what's going to happen to the lake this summer. So with that, we appreciate your support in supporting this Lake Erie executive order request to the president to try and help the algae situation in Lake Erie. Be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Sandy?
question. This is Sarah Helbig. Thanks for taking it. Are you also working with any of the other smaller bodies of water in the area that have the same impact?
When you say smaller bodies of water, what are you referring to?
Well, personally, we have a lake place in northeast Indiana, and I know some of those areas have the same concerns with agricultural runoff and failing septics and things like that that happen in some of those rural areas. And to me, there's the Lake Erie hot button for sure, but there seems to be the same impact on many bodies of water in our region. And I'm curious if there's more horsepower potential with getting some of the other lakes councils and things like that on board as well. So I was just curious what your engagement's been.
The engagement is with anyone whose waters within, if they're inland lakes or whatever that drain into Lake Erie, then we work on them. There are many lakes. There's a lot up in Michigan, certainly Indiana, in Ohio. Buckeye Lake comes to mind right away, that are challenged with these same issues. We're hoping, Lake Erie is kind of like the canary in the coal mine. And when things have happened in Lake Erie, they've helped water quality nationwide. And so one would hope that if we can get this process going and get the accountability, that would ripple off and help all the inland lakes and the other bodies of waters that are meeting the same challenge.
Good. Well done.
I just wanted to cheer at what you're doing. Thanks. It's such important work.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I just want to say Dave Spangler, who was our president of Waterkeeper since 2009, and we lost him last year, which is really sad. And he really believed in the system, and he believed that when Ohio and the governments were telling us that they were going to get it done, and when Kasich was governor, the agreement, the collaborative agreement, everybody was just thrilled with it. And I was worried nothing would happen because there's no teeth in it. There's no accountability. There's no penalty. And very sadly, toward the end of his life, when I talked to him, he was extremely sad that he never got to see Lake Erie recover. I've got grandkids this summer that I don't think are going to be able to go out in the lake, and I'm real troubled by it. Every year in a grandchild's life is very special. And when you lose one and some experiences in the lake, that hurts. That really hurts. So, but thank you for your comments.
Sandy, piggybacking a bit on your mention of accountability, Ken Kilbert has put in the chat box a question wondering what the accountability would be under this executive order.
When I studied Lake Erie and the management as to how it recovered the last time, like in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the federal government managed the recovery out of Grosse Ile, Michigan. And once a year, they had an annual meeting of all the parties, the stakeholders and things. And I would hope this executive order will do that as well. It'll have to, it will be what it is, but we would be asking for that. And then every year we would ask for, now we always get a reporting of how much algae will it be? Will it be, a lot, a little? Where will it be? Is it got microcystin, whatever? What we really want is the other side of the coin. We want to know how much of the sources are being reduced. We want to know how much of the problem is being solved. And so every year we would ask the federal government in this executive order in these meetings to convene and tell us where the reductions are happening, have each state and each area report on the reductions and exactly what's going on, and making sure there's science that verifies it.
And Sandy, would you envision that process being interconnected with the TMDL process?
That is what happened in Chesapeake. The TMDL helped to drive the executive order and what was going on there, but it has to be a good TMDL process, and I would want the federal government to determine what that is so that all elements like the CAFOs that are not mentioned in many of the TMDL, and we all know there's permitted and unpermitted, so it's even bigger than people think, but that become part of the TMDL process. But it takes federal management, and it needs to be the same TMDL in Indiana, in Michigan, and Ohio. We would hope they would use similar criteria in Ontario. We obviously have no jurisdiction over that, but a Biden executive order could coordinate the states and lead and make sure there's accountability and consistency in what's going on. For now, each state kind of does their own thing and then puts it in the pot. And domestic action plans is what they call them.
We have any further questions? Anything in the chat box, Kari?
I can't.
Yes, we do have something in the chat box. Let me read this off. This is from Jonathan Smith with Perrysburg City Council. Regarding the Chesapeake Bay, was the order 60% or 40% reduction? One slide referenced that they had 60% reduction, but in the first slide, there is a 40% reduction. That is the first question, and I will let you answer that one, Sandy.
Okay, so the overall goal in Chesapeake Bay is a 40% reduction by 2025, just like it is here. When they got the executive order from the Biden administration in 2009, from 2000, they realized a 60% of the 40%. So it is a bit confused. A little over half has already been accomplished. So sorry for that confusion.
Thanks for the clarification. One more question. In 2015, it says that half of the 40% reduction by 2025. Can I have clarification on this? The Western Basin of Lake Erie specifically states 40%. I'm confused by the presentation from what I've read in the agreements. Okay,
the collaborative, there was another agreement in 2015-16 by the Kasich administration with Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario. And that agreement asked for 20% or half of the 40% by 2020. We didn't make that. So the overall goal in both Chesapeake and here is 40%. And then sometimes we use a percentage of it. That's probably not a good way to do it since it's confusing to people, and I'll try and correct that in the future. But there was supposed to be by 2020, we were supposed to be halfway there. With the collaborative agreement, we're not. So it's still 40%. The reduction goal target for Lake Erie is 40% according to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement Annex 4. And Joy Ferreiter and all the researchers determined that as well.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. And that looks like all of the, actually, I've just had another question pop in from Mike Libin, or maybe it's a comment. I'll just go ahead and read it off. It seems like there is something similar in position already with the Great Lakes Commission and also the International Joint Commission. Don't those groups already have oversight of the region, or they have the ability to do it and maybe are not completing their mission?
I certainly don't want to criticize the IJC or the Great Lakes Commission, but they have groups certainly interested in Lake Erie, but the core management of the reduction in the algae comes from the agencies, the states, the local governments really aren't at the table right now, which is something I think that needs to happen. But the real need of what's happening is an Annex 4 Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement is where they come together. And it's led by the states instead of by the federal government. So this would be very different than anything that's being done by anyone else.
Okay, and we have Partners for Clean Streams just clarifying that 40% reduction is from 2008 loads, not 40% of current loads or the annual amount. And thank you. I'm assuming that's Chris Patterson. Thank you for that clarification.
That's correct. Chris is good at that. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Sandy, for a great presentation and lively discussion. Our action requested today is approval of a resolution of the Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments supporting Lake Erie Waterkeeper's request that President Joe Biden sign an executive order for Lake Erie watershed protection and restoration. Do I hear a motion?
Also move, John Hall.
So moved. Reese.
We have a motion and a second. May I ask all those in favor to approve?
Aye.
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 Anyone in opposition, please?
No.
Nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions? Thank you all. The motion carries.
Thanks, everyone.
John, for the record, we had some, were there some opposition that we should note the names?
Yes, if someone is opposed, we do need them to state their name. I did not hear any opposition.
This is Alice Godsey. I voted no. My concern is that the executive order will not force the agricultural sector to make those reductions. And in the absence of those reductions, the concern is that further reductions will be imposed on wastewater treatment plants.
All right. Thank you, Alice, and I apologize for not hearing you. I'm operating off my phone.
This is Mike Libben. I also voted no. Basically, I hate seeing more levels of government when it seems like we already have it in place.
All right, thank you, Mike.
And this is Mark Copper, Ottawa County. I'm voting no as well. Similar with Mike Levin, I don't feel we need another layer of oversight on top of this. I think we need to focus our efforts in a better direction, such as support for the program that the Water Quality Committee had at their last meeting with Bowling Green State University.
All right, thank you. Is anyone else in opposition? Once again, I apologize. My phone's somewhat garbled. I do believe the motion still carries. And with that, I am going to turn the second half of the program over to our Vice Chair, Melissa Greenhofer.
All right, thanks, John. And thank you, Sandy, for your presentation today. All right, well, in the interest of keeping the agenda moving, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. We're going to be hearing about resolving the Lake Erie TMDL litigation, the need for intergovernmental cooperation, and Fritz Byers, who is outside general counsel for the Board of Lucas County Commissioners, is going to be telling us a little bit about that today. So real quickly, Fritz Byers received his undergraduate degree summa cum laude with honors in American history from Duke University, where he won the William T. LaPrade Prize in History, and his law degree was earned from Harvard Law School, where he was book review editor of the Harvard Law Record and director of the Civil Rights Action Committee. He has been in solo private practice for 35 years, specializing in constitutional law, communications, criminal justice, healthcare, and education. From 1990 through 2005, he was general counsel for Block Communications. He serves as newsroom counsel for several daily newspapers and other media organizations. He is also outside general counsel for the Board of Lucas County Commissioners. In that role, he represents the commissioners in the litigation pending in federal court before Judge James Carr, seeking remedial action to address the degradation of the Western Lake Erie Basin. So without further ado, we're going to hear from Fritz Byers today on kind of an update on that litigation and what some intergovernmental cooperation might look like as a solution to the HABs issue. I'll turn it over to Fritz.
Thanks very much, Melissa. Can everyone hear me okay? Sorry for dogs barking in the background. I'm delighted to have the chance to talk with you. I think it's fair to say that this presentation has its origins in a presentation that Kari made to the Board of Commissioners of Metro Parks of Toledo. I'm one of the commissioners, and Kari came and spoke to us during our monthly meeting in March. I think it was the 24th of March, and presented some of the details of the Lake Erie. And in response to her participation, after a little bit of discussion, Metro Parks commissioners roundly endorsed that and gave full support. But a portion of Kari's presentation and addressed the aspects of the agenda for Lake Erie that focus on intergovernmental cooperation. So I said at that time, I was in that meeting on behalf of the Lucas County Commissioners, we were very interested in exploring with TMACOG organizations how most effectively to create momentum within an intergovernmental and private interest group action toward an effective remediation of problems that plague Lake Erie. I would be clear, I'm speaking today as counsel for the county commissioners. In no way I'm expressing any views.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we might be having some audio issues. We're getting a bit of a echo. I wonder if I could just ask all participants to mute themselves and see if that takes care of the issue. We'll hope.
I saw a couple people mute themselves. Is that any, Kari?
I am still getting an echo on your end. All right, let's test your sound one more time.
Okay, how does that sound?
I don't know that it's much better, but let's see. It might be better if you were able to call in, but let's see how this goes.
Okay, well, if it works better, Kari, I'll be happy to get off the call and just phone if that works better. So, okay.
Right now it sounds all right.
Okay. So before I begin and go through sort of the nature and structure of the litigation and what I think it can and cannot accomplish, I want to say that I did not know about what Sandy intended to present in her remarks, and the view of the commissioners and my view of litigation substantially overlaps with what Sandy said, both in terms of history of the degradation of Lake Erie, the ineffectiveness of the remedial measures so far, the failure of the government to adhere to the regulations that it admitted to Annex 4, the need for intergovernmental cooperation, reliance on principles of the Chesapeake Bay Accord, which is a very powerful demonstration of how effective a Atmdl can be, and also the need for accountability. Our view.
I'm very sorry to interrupt again. I do think we will need you to actually call in with the call-in number for your audio. I don't think it's just me. Can anyone give a hand if you're also hearing an echo? Okay.
All right. Sorry about that. I'll call in as quickly as I can.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, hopefully Fritz can get called in quickly. Occasionally with these web meetings, we do have issues on the side of our speakers. I remember this happening back in November as well. So hopefully we can get through this quickly.
While we're waiting, if you are a call-in person, can you just state your name so I can have it for attendance, please?
And so far I have Ryan Simmons who called in, and I think that was the only person who I noted. I think everyone else is also represented on the video call.
Okay, that's good. I just wanted to double check.
Okay. And just for everyone's edification, I'm going to look through a couple of the questions or comments in the chat box. I know earlier when Sandy was talking about the animal feeding operations in Wood County, I believe Commissioner Herringshaw did make a clarifying note that the Wood County facility has not been approved, and as she understands it, this is a self-contained operation and will produce methane for its own use. So that's just a bit of clarification there.
Kari, I'm on now. Can you hear me?
That's much better, Fritz.
Good. I'm so sorry if I don't know if the problems were caused on my end, but sorry to have tortured all of your ears for that time.
Okay, you're good to go now.
Okay, so just to wrap up that point, the county commissioners strongly support the idea of requesting executive action from President Biden, and we very much endorse the provisions in the resolution that emphasize vertical and horizontal cooperation, vertically among the various levels of government and horizontally across the various regulatory authorities that have responsibility. I had planned, even before Sandy spoke and before this group passed that resolution, to address that. So I'm going to cover some of the background that Sandy covered in terms of the impairment of the Western Basin of Lake Erie. And I'd like to give a little bit of an update on both the structure and the current posture of the litigation, and then try to give a bit of a pitch for what those on this call could do, both in furtherance of Sandy's resolution and our commitment to that, and also what the county commissioners ask by way of moving forward with a successful resolution of the Clean Water Act litigation pending before Judge Carr. The need for governmental cooperation arises both, in my view, from the general limitations of using litigation as a means for social change, and also several special limitations that are built into the legal and regulatory structure of the Clean Water Act. Before I get to those things, I want to state just a few givens, and I don't believe that any of these givens is subject to any reasonable debate, but if they are, I'm happy to discuss them in the discussion portion of our meeting. I think we all acknowledge that the waters of the Western Basin of Lake Erie are impaired and have been for the best part of 20 years. Algal blooms have been present at least since 2003 in worrisome volumes, and the frequency has only increased. This condition is dangerous to people and to wildlife, to the health of our community, and the social, cultural, and economic vibrancy of our region. I take it as a given that local, state, and federal governments all have an interest in fixing this condition. If one can believe what the state of Ohio has said, certainly since the adoption of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement and the identification of targets and timelines for phosphorus reduction, which Ohio and Michigan, along with Ontario, participated in 2015, the clearly articulated policy of the state of Ohio has been to address and remedy the degradation of the Western Basin of Lake Erie. I think that the statements of the federal government on this from the executive branch have been a little less consistent over the last 10 years, but it's not hard to find the articulation of the federal policy by reading the Clean Water Act, which expresses a strong national policy on that subject, and as is reflected in the agenda for Lake Erie and the adoption of that agenda by so many different governments, as well as the action this group just took in adopting Sandy's resolution, there's, I don't think, any doubt that local and regional governments align strongly in favor of the policy of remedying Lake Erie and restoring it to health. We know it will take time, but it will also take dedicated and concentrated action. So far, as Sandy emphasized, government action has not been as aggressive and effective as any of us would have hoped. I don't think there can be any doubt that there was an untoward delay in the Ohio EPA taking action to declare the waters as impaired nor can it be doubted that there was a delay in identifying solutions and likewise a delay in proposing a TMDL. I do not believe that litigation is the solution to social and societal problems, but I do believe litigation has, throughout the nation's history, served as a useful spur to such action. And I think if we were to take time to go over the chronology of the various cases that have been filed by the Environmental Law and Policy Center and now by the Lucas County Commissioners, it would be striking to see that each progressive action has been taken essentially right on the threshold of Judge Carr's taking action within his jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. I'm going to come back to this point in just a moment to give you an idea of where we stand in that litigation, but I think now is yet another time when the pending litigation and the prospect of some imminent action really cautions us or urges us to take responsible action. I think the consensus for that is wide and deep. The way to go about this is, in my view, undoubtedly intergovernmental cooperation. That's true because of the nature of litigation. I have some background in institutional reform litigation, police reform, and voting rights. And in each of those areas, judicial orders are a foundation to provide an impetus for change. But in the end, the governments that act in our name are accountable and must be held accountable for taking effective action to ensure that we're complying with the law. The nature of the remedies that are available under the Clean Water Act makes this all the more clear, as I think will be demonstrated as we talk about the history of this litigation. But I can safely say that the Board of Lucas County Commissioners got involved in this litigation 4 years ago to lend local government support to a strong push to bring local, state, and federal government and outside interest groups together around a consent decree that would be entered by Judge Carr with the consent of all the parties, that would establish appropriate timelines and targets for the remediation of the problems of the Western Basin of Lake Erie. The reason that this is particularly appropriate with respect to the Clean Water Act is because the Act provides an almost pristine example of two of the foundational elements of how our governments operate. One aspect is the separation and balance of powers. There are executive functions that the Constitution of the state of Ohio in the United States assigns to the executive branch. There are legislative functions and there are judicial functions. And the Clean Water Act, in a remarkably clear way, puts very strong limitations on the power of federal judges to enter effective remedies. They do have power, but the power is narrow and very sharply constrained. Likewise, the Clean Water Act is a model of federalism. That is to say, the vertical relationships among federal governments, state governments, and local governments. The Clean Water Act places primary responsibility on the state in three respects, each of which is crucial. One is to establish what are the desirable beneficial uses for regulated bodies of water. Second is to establish the criteria under which water quality will be evaluated. And then third is to identify waters that are impaired, that is to say, whose water quality is insufficient to meet the beneficial uses. The way that is done under applicable regulations is to study aquatic life, human health, recreational opportunities, and the safety of public drinking water. When a state determines that a body of water is impaired, the Clean Water Act imposes a non-discretionary and non-delegable obligation to develop a TMDL, and that must be done for each impaired body of water. So the primary responsibility for evaluation and the primary responsibility for remediating problems falls with the state government under the Clean Water Act. The federal government, in contrast, sits essentially as a supervisor or reviewer of the actions of the state government to evaluate the adequacy of the lists of impaired waters and to evaluate the adequacy of a TMDL and either approve or disapprove one that is submitted. A really thorny question under the Clean Water Act is what is to be done when no TMDL has been submitted. And a gap in the Clean Water Act is that it does not provide a timeline for the submission by the state EPA to the US EPA of a TMDL, even after a body of water has been listed on the list of impaired waters that the US EPA has approved. That is one of the current conundrums in the case that is pending before Judge Carr. I'll come back to that in just a moment. The reality is a little more complicated than what I'm about to say, but for purposes of this discussion, I want to say that in effect, the only remedy that the Clean Water Act provides is an order compelling the federal EPA to perform its obligations, either disprove a manifestly inadequate TMDL, to approve without delay an adequate TMDL, or, we believe, to take action when, after an unconscionably long period of time of inaction, a state has failed to prepare a TMDL to address an impaired body. The current litigation pending before Judge Carr was filed in the spring of 2019, challenging the USA EPA's approval of Ohio's 2018 integrated report, which, despite the identification of the Western Basin of Lake Erie as an impaired body, and despite a fairly thorough exploration of the severity of that pollution, the Ohio EPA assigned a low priority to a Lake Erie TMDL and declined to make any affirmative statement that Ohio EPA would pursue a TMDL for Western Lake Erie. The county commissioners, along with the other plaintiffs in the case, alleged that that was a legal violation because the US EPA approved a report that failed to take into account the severity of pollution. And federal law is clear that states must take into account the severity of pollution in determining when and under what timeline a TMDL is to be developed. The US EPA moved to dismiss the case essentially on the ground that there had been no legal violation, because even though no TMDL was promised or committed to or either identified as falling within the intention of the Ohio EPA, that there had not been, to use a legal phrase, an unambiguous refusal to develop a TMDL. In late 2019, Judge Carr denied the US EPA's motion to dismiss, finding that we had properly pleaded a legal violation and that if we proved defects that we had alleged, all of which were based on publicly accessible documents that were in the US EPA file, we would have established a violation of the Clean Water Act, entitling us to some remedy. It was after that decision that in February of 2020, the Ohio EPA announced for the first time its intention to develop a TMDL within 2 to 3 years. And that was finalized when the final integrated report was submitted to the US EPA and approved mid to late May of 2020. So that change in circumstances creates a wide range of legal issues within the case. In shorthand, I would say that the plaintiff's view is that belated, non-binding expressions of intention are not sufficient to remedy a proven legal violation of duties that fall on the state under the Clean Water Act. The federal government's view, I think, can fairly be summarized as that's old history. Ohio's 2020 integrated report expresses its intention to develop a TMDL. At a minimum, that is not a, quote, unambiguous refusal to develop a TMDL, and therefore, Judge Carr, you do not have any jurisdiction to enter any order under the Clean Water Act. These are intricate legal issues. Judge Carr heard oral argument on them across 2 days. It felt like a week. I think the arguments lasted for about 14 hours, and they were very, as I said, they were intricate and they were legally technical, and they leave this case in an uncertain position. A principle I believe more strongly now than I did 35 years ago when I began doing institutional reform litigation is that there is no win in litigation that remains adversarial. Thus the need for cooperation both vertically and horizontally. Judge Carr has said openly on repeated occasions that he strongly encourages the parties in the case. That's Lucas County, the Environmental Law and Policy Center, the Ohio EPA, which is participating as a friend of court, to address these issues through a collectively acceptable solution. The view of the Board of County Commissioners is that that's an appropriate process, although the ultimate result of that should be the submission of that solution to Judge Carr for entry as a consent decree. I am not aware of any environmental case that has been successfully resolved without a consent decree of that nature. We asked the judge to order the development of a TMDL within 2 years after a full public process, which is essentially what happened in Chesapeake Bay and what produced what is one of the most effective TMDLs certainly in my living memory. Our goal is that the TMDL have fixed timelines, reporting periods, and aspirational targets. We understand this can't be done easily, and that there will be a wide variety of views about what the appropriate aspirational targets are. But we think that the very nature of the contamination of Lake Erie makes clear that purely voluntary action, whether it be through the impetus of the DeWine administration or through a TMDL, can by definition not be effective to reduce phosphorus to the level that the state has said it should be reduced to, that is 40% of 2008 levels by 2025. Our view is that there's nothing untoward in asking a state to stand by the promises it has made publicly. We think the best way to fight the cancer of cynicism about government is for governments to commit that they will undertake the things they say they will undertake. The Board of County Commissioners is prepared to begin a cooperative and collegial and collaborative process toward identifying the timelines and targets for a TMDL. That's what we've asked Judge Carr to assist in doing. That's why the Board of County Commissioners undertook this litigation. We're heartened by the action that this body has taken in adopting the agenda for Lake Erie, and also in passing the request for strong and directive executive direction from President Biden. We think that that should flow through the channels of federal government to the US EPA so that it will participate openly and actively in creating a TMDL that can be embodied in a consent decree. So we would love to work closely with all of your members now and into the future in furtherance of that goal. Thank you for your time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Fritz. Does anybody have any questions? I'll go ahead and open up the floor to any questions for Fritz Byers.
This is Sandy Benn. I just want to say thanks to Fritz for an amazing legal history of the TMDL process in the Chesapeake. I will use that recording and put it in the website just to explain if people really want to get into the weeds of how the litigation is working and what exactly is being done. It's so important to have an effective TMDL that will really get the reductions we need. So thanks so much for the county and all the work everybody's doing. And just as a set aside to the other comment on the Wood County CAFO, I'm glad to hear they are going to do a digester. Yes, that permit is in progress. I would ask that the county commissioners and other people support having phosphorus limits in the soil equal to that of fertilizer or the agronomic rate as we know it. So if in fact it's a self-contained facility and it's not going to put anything into the ground, I would assume they're going to put some waste in the ground from the cows, and that be limited to the agronomic or fertilizer rate. Thank you.
Fritz, this is John Eckel. I just want to thank you for your presentation and have a much clearer understanding of the facts involved in this issue. But thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Eckel. I appreciate your comment.
I see a hand up from Ken Kilbert.
Thank you, and thank you, Fritz, for that presentation. It is a lot of technical issues. The Clean Water Act has a lot of nuance to it in connection with this issue. I was curious about the request for relief. The TMDL, of course, Ohio is not a party to the litigation. It's the US EPA, which is the defendant. And ultimately, the judge doesn't have authority to order Ohio EPA, I don't think, to do anything. So what is it that US EPA would do the TMDL? That's what's being sought here?
Professor Kilbert, that's a really good question, and I did gloss over that. I'm not surprised you saw it. I didn't do it to be deceptive, but I didn't want to go too much into the layers of jurisdiction here. So let me try and answer that as concisely as possible. You are correct that the only defendants in the case are the US EPA as an agency, the national director, and the regional director of the US EPA. There is nothing within the Clean Water Act that would allow us to make the state EPA a party. The state EPA accepted Judge Carr's invitation to appear as an amicus in the brief. I made a reference to their appearance as a friend of court. They have actively participated in discussions that we have had with Judge Carr, and also outside of Judge Carr's presence at his urging, regarding a process that would actively involve the state EPA. I am under an order from Judge Carr that I not disclose any contents of the last discussion we had with Judge Carr or the discussions we have had with the US EPA and the state EPA. I say that just so you know, Professor, that I'm a little bit limited in my ability to go much further, but I am comfortable telling you because this has, what I'm about to allude to, happened in open court, despite the fact that the Ohio EPA is not a formal party in the case. They have on several occasions as an amicus expressed their willingness to participate in discussions about a consent decree, and the prospect of Ohio EPA voluntarily submitting to federal court jurisdictions for purposes of entering a remedy, that has come up. I don't for a moment want to say that the state has said that it will do so, but that subject, I believe I'm saying this correctly, Professor, has come up twice in open court. I know it has come up at least once toward the end of the second half of the summary judgment arguments last August. And Professor Kilbert, I'm really not able to say much more beyond that. I hope that at least gives you a little bit of a flavor of how that issue, which you properly raised, currently rests within the case.
Thank you, Fritz. And yes, it would be great if a consent decree could be agreed to, that the state and the feds are a party to it, and even better, that the state agrees to actually abide by targets set forth in that kind of document. So as you know, one of the issues on TMDLs is the ability to quote unquote enforce it, to require the state to actually do something, particularly in connection with non-point sources. But thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you, Professor.
And this is Kari. I'll also note that Ohio EPA is in the process of developing a TMDL for the Western Lake Erie Basin. And they've committed to a 2 to 3 year timeline for developing that. But Mr. Byers, is there some additional, I guess, teeth or enforcement authority that a consent decree would then offer to the process? As I said, Ohio EPA is actually developing that TMDL now.
Right. Kari, you're correct that they have publicly said they will do so, and they have set their timeline to being within 2 to 3 years. One of the concerns that we have about that is an unenforceable commitment. To my way of thinking, if 2 years from now, and I'm not saying the state will default on this, although I do have concerns given Ohio's history over the last 10 years, but if for any reason, whether it be a change of administration or a change of focus, Ohio EPA were to change its mind and say, well, we thought better of it, we're going to return to a cooperative process for addressing this, the state's commitment is not binding in any way. So we would prefer, and we believe everyone familiar with the history of Lake Erie in this century would prefer, that there be a process, to use Sandy's word, of accountability, so that a retreat from any public commitments, either in terms of the existence of a TMDL its timing, or its content, any shortcoming would have consequences, not merely political consequences at the ballot box, but real legal consequences. We believe that the weight of authority in American law about effective remedies within the world of what's called equitable relief suggests that those are appropriate measures of accountability for a federal judge to implement in the wake of a long-running history of state failure to comply with legal obligations. So yes, I do believe we need more accountability and more effectiveness than a non-enforceable commitment from the state government provides.
Sorry, I have a question. Steve Pilcher, Village of White House. Would it be better to regulate the tributaries flowing into Lake Erie rather than Lake Erie itself, since it's an interstate and international body of water?
I'll give you a non-scientist view on that, since I'm far from an environmental scientist, and maybe Melissa can comment on behalf of Lucas County on that question. But my answer to that is yes, it would be more effective. And I think that's what a TMDL has to address in order to be effective.
I don't know that I have any specific comments on that. I mean, I think that, you know, I know that and again, if anyone from the Ohio EPA is on and wants to clarify or go into more detail, I know that there are TMDLs being developed for tributaries that flow into Western Lake Erie. I think some of them account for phosphorus and some of them don't. But I think we have learned that, you know, there's value in kind of having an overarching, all-encompassing goal and process around reducing harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie. But I would think that kind of breaking it up into the tributaries and trying to, you know, set goals and do projects and monitor progress in the smaller tributaries would make it maybe, I don't know if I want to say easier, but certainly, you know, doing it that way would probably be easier to track. And, you know, I think this issue is so complex that I think inevitably it will be done that way, but under a more larger, all-encompassing TMDL goal for the entire region to work towards.
And Melissa, I think that is Ohio EPA's intent from what I've seen with the development process, is exactly what you described, taking the nutrient reductions that need to happen in the lake and then backing them up and applying them to the individual tributaries. What Ohio EPA has committed to do is to break down the non-point source loads that need to, reductions that need to happen in each of those watersheds. One of my concerns is that those non-point source reductions don't include a breaking out of the different non-point sources. So manure versus commercial fertilizer versus other forms of phosphorus or other sources of phosphorus. So my thinking is that through something like a consent decree, that sort of language could be worked into the TMDL. Is that something, Fritz, that could be included?
Yes, I think my short answer to that is yes. I don't know of any legal or pragmatic reason it couldn't be included.
Are there any more questions or comments for Fritz Byers? Kari, I think one just came into the chat box. I don't know if you want to take that, or if you want me to.
Sure, I can read it. This is also from Chris Patterson at Partners for Clean Streams. As in the Chesapeake, it is many TMDLs in numerous states that make up the network of TMDLs that could cumulatively achieve reductions by proportioned out amounts per state than per subwatershed. And Chris, if there's anything you'd like to expand on, go ahead.
No, I was just trying to clarify that it's the network together of those TMDLs, but it has led to states suing each other and, you know, outside entities suing states and suing the feds. And so there has been many lawsuits over time in the Chesapeake that have led to the refinement or the, you know, extension of the timelines. I'm not sure that they've ever met a timeline in the Chesapeake that has been outlined in any of those legal or TMDL actions, but I could be wrong. But they, you know, so that over time it has been patchworked and networked together under a cohesive framework after that executive order.
Thanks, Chris. Is there anything else? Okay, well, I'm sure that if anyone has any additional questions for Fritz Byers, they're certainly welcome to send those questions to Kari or myself or John or Fritz himself, and he'd be happy to answer those questions.
And I'll also add that Fritz did prepare some documents